Being an empath is not only about kindness. It is not only about caring deeply. It is also about carrying more than most people will ever realize. It is about walking through the world with heightened awareness, where you not only hear words, but also sense the weight behind them, where you notice the slight hesitation in a voice, the shift in tone, the silence between sentences. It is about feeling things that others do not acknowledge, sensing undercurrents that remain invisible to most. On the surface, this may sound like an extraordinary gift, and in many ways, it is. But what often gets lost in a conversation is the other side of empathy, the side that is rarely spoken about, the exhaustion that comes from carrying emotions that are not yours, the confusion of not always knowing which feelings belong to you and which belong to someone else, the deep, unshakable sense that you're different, and that this difference is not always easy to explain. That is why being an empath can sometimes feel like both a gift and a curse. It can feel like holding a quiet power that others do not see, but also like carrying a weight you never asked for. It can feel like clarity in one moment and complete overwhelm in the next. And because the world often does not understand this, empaths are left with questions that echo quietly inside. Why do I feel so much? Why do I notice what others ignore? Why do I walk away from conversations with emotions that do not feel like mine? These are questions that do not have easy answers, but they point to a deeper truth. The truth is that being an empath is not what most people think. It is not simply about being good-hearted or gentle. It is not about always being the person who gives. It is not about fragility. It is about awareness. It is about the ability to sense what lies beneath the surface. It is about carrying a strength that often goes unseen because it looks different from the kind of strength the world usually praises. And here is where the misunderstanding happens. Because when empathy goes unrecognized and unprotected, it begins to feel heavy. It begins to drain rather than guide. It begins to confuse rather than clarify. And that is when empathy is mistaken for weakness. That is when the gift begins to feel like a curse. But the truth is that empathy itself is never the curse. The real challenge lies in not knowing how to live with it, how to honor it, and how to protect it. When you learn to do that, empathy transforms. What once felt overwhelming begins to feel like clarity. What once felt like heaviness begins to feel like guidance. What once left you drained begins to leave you grounded. Chapter 1. What it really means to be an empath. To understand what it truly means to be an empath, we need to look beyond the surface. The word itself is often used casually as though it only means being kind or compassionate. But empathy runs far deeper than that. It is not simply about being nice or having good intentions. It is about perceiving the world in a way that is more layered, more textured, and more sensitive than most people experience. To be an empath is to notice what others overlook. It is to hear not just the words spoken, but the tone behind them. It is to feel the tension in a room before anyone acknowledges it. It is to sense the shift in someone's mood, even when they say everything is fine. It is an awareness that extends beyond the obvious, beyond what is seen, into the subtleties that most people pass by without realizing. This awareness does not switch off. It is not something you choose to feel one moment and release the next. It moves with you through the day, shaping how you interact, how you listen, how you respond. You might walk into a gathering and instantly feel the energy, even before you have spoken to anyone. You might sit beside someone and quietly absorb their restlessness, their worry, or their calm without them needing to say a word. This constant tuning in creates a life where you are always noticing, always sensing, always absorbing. And while that creates extraordinary depth of understanding, it also brings weight, because being attuned to others means you're often holding more than your share. It is as if you're carrying not only your own emotions, but also fragments of the emotions around you. Sometimes this can feel like a gift when it allows you to connect and respond with care. Other times, it can feel like a burden when you leave interactions feeling heavy without fully knowing why. Another part of being an empath is the blurring of boundaries between self and other. When you feel deeply, it can become difficult to tell where your emotions end and someone else's begin. You may find yourself asking, "Why am I feeling so unsettled? Why am I carrying this sadness? Why am I anxious for no reason?" And only later realize that these emotions may not even belong to you. They were absorbed, taken in as part of your natural sensitivity. This blurring is part of what makes empathy so misunderstood. To the outside world, you may appear calm and collected. No one can see the weight you're carrying internally. People may assume your sensitivity is light and effortless, when in truth it requires constant processing, constant sorting through what belongs to you and what does not. And because this work is invisible, empaths often feel unseen, as though their experience is not fully understood. But here's the important truth. Being an empath is not about fragility. It is not about being weak. It is not about being overly dramatic or emotional. It is about having an internal radar that is more sensitive than most. It is about noticing details that others do not. It is about picking up on layers that remain hidden to many. This is not a flaw. It is simply a different way of experiencing the world. To live as an empath means to move through life with heightened awareness. It means to carry both the beauty and the burden of sensitivity. It means to know that your perception is both a gift and a responsibility. And while it can feel overwhelming at times, it is also what makes your presence deeply valuable. Because where others might miss what lies beneath, you see it. Where others might overlook the quiet signals, you feel them. Where others might dismiss the subtleties, you notice them. And that is what it really means to be an empath. Not simply to care, but to notice. Not simply to give, but to sense. Not simply to feel, but to absorb. It is a way of experiencing the world that is more intense, more layered, and more vulnerable than most. And when you begin to understand this clearly, you can also begin to see why empathy, though powerful, can sometimes feel like a hidden curse. Chapter 2. The Hidden Struggles. While the gift of empathy brings depth, connection, and clarity, it also carries struggles that few people see. These struggles are often quiet and invisible, yet they can shape the entire way an empath moves through life. They are not the kinds of challenges that make themselves obvious on the surface. Instead, they show up in subtle ways, in the heaviness that lingers long after a moment has passed, in the confusion that rises without explanation, in the exhaustion that cannot be traced back to anything tangible. One of the most common struggles is emotional exhaustion. For many empaths, even ordinary days can feel draining. This is not because they lack strength, but because they are constantly taking in more than their share. An empath does not just carry their own worries, joys, and responsibilities. They also absorb the moods and tensions of those around them. Imagine walking through a crowded room and without realizing it, collecting bits of every person's energy. By the time you leave, you're not just carrying your own emotions, you're carrying fragments of everyone else's as well. Over time, this creates a heaviness that builds quietly, almost unnoticed, until it suddenly feels overwhelming. Another struggle lies in the confusion of identity. Empaths often find themselves asking, are these feelings really mine, or did they belong to someone else? It can be difficult to tell the difference. A sudden wave of sadness, a restless unease, or an unexplained worry might rise up, and an empath will not always know where it came from. This lack of clarity blurs the line between self and other, making it hard to stay grounded in one's own emotions. It is like standing in a crowded room with too many voices speaking at once, and not knowing which one is truly your own. There is also the struggle of silence because the empath's experience is internal. It is not always visible to those around them. On the outside, an empath may appear calm, present, and engaged, but inside, they may be processing layers of emotion that no one else realizes are there. And when they try to explain this, they may be met with confusion or dismissal. People may say, "You're too sensitive," or "You are imagining things." These words cut deeply because they not only dismiss the empath's experience, but also plant seeds of self-doubt. Over time, the empath may begin to question themselves. They may wonder if their perceptions are valid, if their feelings are real, if their sensitivity is something to be ashamed of. Then there is the loneliness. When you notice things others do not, it can be isolating. You may walk through life with an awareness that others do not share, and this awareness can make you feel different. It can feel as though you're carrying something invisible that separates you from the people around you. While others move easily through situations without noticing the undercurrents, you are weighed down by them. And because few people talk openly about this, you may feel as though you're navigating it alone. Another hidden struggle is the difficulty of rest. Rest is not simply about sleep or taking breaks. For an empath, rest requires release. It requires letting go of emotions that were never yours to carry in the first place. And this is not always easy to do. Without tools or awareness, emotions can cling like shadows. Even in moments meant for relaxation, an empath may find themselves replaying conversations, analyzing interactions, or feeling the echo of moods that are long past. This makes true rest rare, and without it, the cycle of exhaustion deepens. Perhaps the most painful struggle of all is self-doubt. Because the world often values strength that looks firm and unshakable, sensitivity can be misunderstood. Empaths may internalize the belief that they are fragile, that they are weak, that they are somehow flawed for feeling so much. They may try to harden themselves to shut down their sensitivity, to silence what they sense. But doing so only creates more disconnection because they are denying the very thing that makes them who they are. These struggles are the hidden weight of empathy. They are the quiet challenges that shape an empath's life but remain unseen by others. They are why empathy, despite its beauty, can sometimes feel like a curse. And yet, even in these struggles, there is a thread of hope. Because once they are named and understood, they can be addressed. Once they are brought into the light, they no longer have the same power to confuse or overwhelm. Chapter 3. Why it feels like a curse. If empathy is such a profound gift, why does it so often feel like a curse? Why do so many empaths reach a point where their sensitivity feels less like clarity and more like a heavy burden they cannot put down? The answer lies in the way empathy interacts with a world that is not always designed for it. The challenge is not the sensitivity itself, but the way it is experienced when it goes unrecognized, unprotected, and unbalanced. One of the reasons empathy feels like a curse is the sheer intensity of it. Most people move through life with a level of awareness that is steady, manageable, and filtered. They experience their own feelings and perhaps notice a few signals from others, but nothing overwhelming. An empath, however, lives without that same filter. They are open to undercurrents that others barely register. They notice not just what is obvious, but also what is hidden. And while this allows for incredible understanding, it can also be exhausting because it means carrying more information, more emotion, and more weight than the average person ever encounters. This constant intake creates overwhelm. Imagine being tuned into every sound in a crowded room. While others can focus on a single voice, your ears catch every whisper, every shuffle, every background noise. You cannot turn it off, and eventually the noise becomes too much. That is what empathy can feel like. Only instead of sound, it is emotion. Instead of noise, it is energy. It is not that you choose to carry it, it is that your system is naturally attuned to pick it up and the volume rarely quiets. Another reason empathy feels like a curse is the lack of boundaries. When you are deeply sensitive to others, it is difficult to separate what belongs to you from what belongs to them. This blurring of lines can leave you feeling like you have lost yourself. You may walk away from a simple conversation feeling heavy, restless, or sad without knowing why. And because the world often does not teach us how to protect these boundaries, you end up carrying emotions that were never yours to hold. Over time, this builds into fatigue, confusion, and a quiet sense of being overwhelmed by life itself. Empathy also feels like a curse because it makes you vulnerable in ways that are not always visible. When you notice subtleties others ignore, you can also be deeply affected by them. A careless word, a dismissive tone, a subtle tension in a room can weigh heavily on you, even when others brush it off without a thought. What others overlook, you absorb. What others forget, you remember. What others dismiss, you carry. This vulnerability is not weakness, but it often feels like it because the world praises resilience that looks like indifference rather than sensitivity. There is also the challenge of misunderstanding. Empaths are often told they are too sensitive, too emotional, too fragile. These words sink in sometimes for years until the empath begins to believe them. They begin to see their sensitivity not as a strength, but as a flaw that sets them apart. They may feel shame for caring so deeply, for noticing what others do not, for being affected by things that others find trivial. This misunderstanding can be more painful than the sensitivity itself, because it plants seeds of self-doubt that grow quietly in the background of an empath's life. And perhaps the deepest reason empathy feels like a curse is the isolation it creates. When you experience the world in a way that others do not, it can feel lonely. You may feel invisible, as though no one else notices what you notice, feels what you feel, or carries what you carry. This loneliness is not about being alone in the physical sense. It is about feeling alone in perception, alone in awareness, alone in the intensity of your experience. And over time, this can make empathy feel less like a gift and more like a burden you must bear in silence. But here is the important truth. The curse is not the empathy itself. The curse is the misunderstanding, the lack of boundaries, the overwhelm that comes from not knowing how to manage it. Empathy feels like a curse only when it is unrecognized and unprotected. When it is nurtured, honored, and balanced, it becomes something entirely different. It becomes a source of clarity, a compass, a quiet strength that guides you through the world with wisdom and depth. The very thing that feels like too much can transform into the very thing that steadies you. The gift does not need to be hidden. It needs to be understood. And that understanding begins with recognizing the struggles not as flaws, but as signals. Signals that point to the need for care, for boundaries, for practices that allow empathy to thrive without overwhelming the one who carries it. This is why the empath's journey is not about silencing their sensitivity or trying to harden themselves. It is about learning to live with their gift in a way that is sustainable. It is about reclaiming empathy from the shadow of curse and bringing it back into the light of strength. And as we move forward, we will begin to see how this transformation can take place. Chapter 4. The turning point. There often comes a moment in an empath's journey when the weight becomes too much to carry in silence. It may not be a single event, but rather a gradual realization, a quiet truth that grows louder with time, the recognition that something needs to change. This moment is what I call the turning point, and it is where the experience of empathy begins to shift. The turning point usually arrives after years of carrying emotions that were not yours, after countless moments of walking away from conversations feeling drained, after too many nights lying awake replaying the day, trying to sort through what was yours and what belonged to someone else. It arrives when you can no longer ignore the exhaustion that has been building quietly in the background of your life. When you realize that being constantly attuned to others has left little room for yourself. At first, this recognition can feel heavy. It may bring frustration or even sadness because you see how long you have carried what was never meant for you. You may look back and wonder how many times you gave away your energy without realizing it. How many times you put others' feelings ahead of your own, not out of choice, but out of instinct. How many times you silenced your needs because the weight of others was louder. This reflection is not easy. It can stir regret. It can bring grief. But it also holds a seed of transformation, because the turning point is not only about seeing the burden, it is about realizing that you have a choice. For the first time, you begin to understand that empathy does not have to mean endless giving. It does not have to mean constant exhaustion. It does not have to mean carrying everything for everyone. Empathy can be lived differently. It can be protected. It can be shaped into something that strengthens rather than weakens you. This shift often begins with boundaries. At first, the idea of boundaries may feel uncomfortable, even unnatural. Empaths are used to opening up, to absorbing, to giving without question. But when you start to create boundaries, you realize something powerful. Boundaries are not walls. They are not barriers that shut you off from others. They are filters. They are the way you decide what you allow in and what you keep out. They are the way you protect your energy without losing your compassion. The turning point is also about learning to center yourself. For so long, your attention may have been outward, focused on others, tuned to their needs and feelings. But when you turn inward, even for small moments, you begin to reconnect with yourself. You begin to ask, what do I need right now? What am I feeling in this moment? What belongs to me and what does not? These questions may seem simple, but they are profound. They are the beginning of reclaiming your own energy, your own clarity, your own sense of self. Another part of the turning point is acceptance. For years, you may have seen your empathy as something to hide, something to toughen up against, something to fix. But at the turning point, you begin to see it differently. You begin to accept that your sensitivity is not a flaw. It is not a weakness. It is simply a way of being. And when you stop fighting it, you open the door to living with it more peacefully. You begin to see how your gift can guide you rather than weigh you down.